First off, I wanted to just give you guys, let you guys know what organization I'm from and give a little background on us. I am the president. We're working on decolonizing our leadership positions, but for now I am the president of Guevaristas for Revolutionary Empowerment of Black and Latinx Society, or G-Rebels.
Yeah.
So we got our name after Guevaristas comes from El Che Guevara, who fought for Cuba and helped create a successful socialist state 90 miles from the coast of the greatest military power in the world. His ideology of shared responsibility, equality, and the thought that we could create a new man or person if we turned away from capitalist mentality of competition and greed, and if we cared about each other instead of competed, and if we saw society as a collective effort towards equality and the betterment for the whole of humanity and not just for a select few. We started in November with the main focus of bridging the gap between the Black and Latino community, who oftentimes we live in the same neighborhood, we face the same kind of discrimination, but we fight with each other to be seen as better when, in all honesty, white people generally don't like either of us. So it doesn't really make much sense. For example, Michael Brown was shot down in the street by Darren Wilson, and he walked free because he was protected by the entire police apparatus in the state of Missouri and in our even up to the federal government. And a few years ago, there was a Mexican boy who was shot by ICE, and he's being protected by our entire government. Mexico can't bring any charges against him. The United States won't hear any charges. There's a Supreme Court case coming up to see if they'll hear a civil case on it. So it's not even, this man won't even face any charges, it's just money to be paid for somebody's life. But just because it's a different uniform doesn't mean that it's not the same state-sponsored terrorism towards both of our communities. Our organization wants to address anti-Blackness in the Latino community and promote unity between us because through community outreach, cultural classes, forums, and something I feel personally passionate about is that we want to follow in the footsteps of the Black Panthers and kind of continue their free meals to underserved community members, and as well as have access to showers and other hygienic needs. We're still in our infant stages. Like I said, we started in November, so we're kind of, getting our structure together, but we're aiming for our first official community event to be in Irving Square Park in Bushwick sometime in July, hopefully. If you're interested in learning more, donating to us, or being a volunteer or a member, after the meeting, we'll be around. You guys can sign up on our mailing list. A month ago, I went on an alternative spring break with my school to the United States-Mexico border with my professor who had lived there for 12 years, so she knew the area very well. Her husband was actually undocumented, and then he recently got full citizenship. So, but it was very stressful for them to go through that process, so she had a lot of insight. So just to give you guys some background, we were in the Rio Grande Valley, specifically in Hidalgo County. And the area is at least 90% Mexican, and there's a lot of census issues because a lot of the census takers don't speak Spanish, and when you have an area of 90% Mexican people, it's, you need to speak Spanish. There's also colonias that people are unwilling to go out to take census information, so it's hard to get a truly accurate picture. 75% of the people who live there live in mixed legal status families, and 15 to 17 of the people there are undocumented. 15 to 17% of the people there are undocumented. There has been double-digit unemployment for 25 years. There are no school buses in the entire school district. So if a student wants to go to school, their parents have to take them. Imagine being undocumented and you can't get a license. How are you going to take your child to school? And only 2 out of every 10 eligible voters are actually registered to vote. So when we were there, we met with one of my professor's former students. She works with Proyecto Azteca, which is like a nonprofit. It's a community organization. And she told us a story. This is one of the stories that impacted me the most, so I thought I would share it with you guys, about Border Patrol. Her father works as like kind of a contractor for Border Patrol, and he works as transport. So when they have unaccompanied minors and they take them to be processed, and they're now taking them to their other facility, she told us that a lot of the time the children don't even want to leave him because they're so afraid of what's going to happen next, because they don't know anybody, and he treats them better than anybody else has treated them. But the one particular story story she told us was that there was one day where he was there, and they separate them, you know, male, female, children, families, there's different quadrants, and they start separating them young. And apparently for young girls, they start separating them as soon as they see signs of puberty. So if you're 12 years old and you just happen to be developed, you're separated from your family. Your mother goes somewhere else and you're left by yourself. You don't have your mother at 12 years old, 10 years old even, if that's the case. So he was there, and there were there was a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old siblings that were left alone even though their parents were there, they were left alone in the children's section. And the 2-year-old woke up from a nap and he started crying, and he was crying for his mother, and he wanted to be held. And obviously, you know, the 7-year-old couldn't really do anything. He's 7. And so her father said, "Can I go hold him?" And they said, "No, you're not allowed to touch him." So he had to leave because he was so angry, because they just ignored it like nothing was happening. There was this 2-year-old baby crying and screaming for his mother, and everybody was just business as usual, walking around acting like nothing was happening. And I found that to be just a very impactful story to hear, that this is, you know, Border Patrol is presenting this certain image, and this is what's actually happening in the detention centers. The area that we were in has often been called a constitution-free zone. You have no rights. You have no protections against unreasonable search and seizure. You don't have the right to remain silent. They pull people over like nothing. We were driving, and there were 4 Border Patrol agents stopping one car of 2 people. So we're talking like 6, 7, 8 Border Patrol agents armed with weapons to stop 2 people for probably what was a minor traffic violation. So there's constant rights being infringed upon. They ask people for documentation over rolling through a stop sign or whatever minor infraction. There was another case of a guy he was under DACA. So he had a legal status to be here. They pulled him over, and they were like, "Give us your papers, give us any documentation." He said, "It's at home. If you follow me home, I can give you my papers." And they said, "That's not good enough," and brought him to the detention center and held him for 6 months. Yes, so, and also when they bring them into the detention centers, only children between 10 and 17 are actually allowed to shower. Everybody else sometimes goes 6 or 7 days without showering because there's so many people in there, and it's not priority to give them something so basic, to let somebody have the dignity to take a shower and to clean themselves. And oftentimes, well, every time actually, the United States government doesn't pay to deport anybody, so they force people to pay for their own deportations. So if you don't have any money, if you don't have any family, you're held there indefinitely until somebody can pay to get you out of there, to put you on a bus to wherever they're going to send you. And a big issue there also is, I had mentioned earlier, the colonias, which are kind of small developments. Oftentimes what happens is landowners will rent out land to someone, and then settlements just start kind of popping up as people come over. There's a huge lack of housing there. So a lot of times what happens is old trailers that, from the 70s that have a lot of that don't meet a lot of regulations now will be used to house families, and then they simply build onto them, add on top of them. So you have very unsafe, unclean, no infrastructure. And you go there and you think that you're in a third world country. The richest country in the history of humanity should not have settlements where there's no running water in some cases, there's no paved streets. We drove through it and it was, you're bouncing in the car because there's just so many potholes. It's truly terrible. And also these colonias are often subject to immigration raids. ICE comes in and they just start knocking on doors, opening, asking people for identification, which they're not really allowed to do. And also down there they have independent school districts, which have their own police forces. Independent school districts have their own police forces, which are allowed to be out. They don't just have to stop students. They are out as if they're regular police officers. And they aid with Border Patrol and ICE, and oftentimes they'll pull people over for something and then call ICE for backup, and then somebody gets detained over something really small. And Amber, the woman that we worked with, was telling us that a lot of the time it's targeted too. It's not, she drives a nicer car, and so she's never been stopped and asked for her identification. But, older cars, beat down cars that are not as nice, they're often targeted specifically because they know poorer people there tend to have mixed status. And we also met with Border Patrol. They gave us Nancy Pelosi had just been there the week before, and so they gave us the same briefing as her, but they wouldn't let us into the detention center. We asked them for a tour, and they were like, no, we'll give you the presentation, but you can't have the tour. And we wonder why. It was a lot of propaganda that is being given of, oh, we're the good guys, we're saving these people, we're helping them, when in actuality, a lot of the time what happens is that they close off previous places of entry and force migrants to take even more dangerous routes. They're forcing people to go through the desert. They're forcing people to rely on coyotes and all of these other means that end up in human rights abuses. And there was actually a case, we spoke to a lawyer with the ACLU, and she was telling us that there was actually a case of there was a family trying to cross the river, and they were in a raft, and they threw firecrackers at them and sunk the raft. And then there was someone screaming, I can't swim, help me, and they got the person, luckily. But the fact that they were doing that, and then Border Patrol was just kind of like, oh, that's not our issue, really. So it's a lot of abuses going on. They're catching and they're beating migrants oftentimes if they have to chase them, sexually assaulting women, and a lot of the new complaints that have been coming out is they're using Trump as a means to verbally abuse. Oh, Trump is going to get you guys out of here. Trump is letting us, deport you all and everything. And they're creating this, this moral panic. They're telling everybody, oh, these traffickers, these smugglers, they're so bad. They're bringing in all these people. And what are we so afraid of? These people are, most of the time families, unaccompanied minors, people fleeing horrific gang violence. There's nothing to really be afraid of, but we're so afraid of these people coming over, and going back to Trump, who said, they're rapists, they're drug dealers. It goes back all the way back to this narrative of, like it said in the video earlier, of protecting, white womanhood. Oh, the rapists, the brown men, they're gonna come and they're gonna rape our women, and that's not what any of these people are coming here to do. We also worked at a respite center. There was Sister Norma. She's a nun who is a part of a Catholic church down there, and she started a center where Border Patrol would, this is under the Obama administration, they allowed ICE to do a lot more catch and release, so it was a lot more of if this person is discretion. If this person wasn't dangerous, they were allowed to release them, and to, they would either come back for a hearing or see if they had a case for asylum. So they would release them, and they would go to the respite center where they could get clothes, they could get food, they could get a shower, and then, someone would take them to the bus station where they could go wherever they were going before their trial would start, or their appeal. And they told us that in mid-January, right before Trump's inauguration, they were hitting, the most that they hit was 400 people a day, and now there's 10 to 15 because ICE is no longer releasing people. They're actually tricking them and having them sign expedited deportation orders, telling them that it'll let them out, and then they end up going home. Just putting them on a bus to wherever. And you could be deporting someone back to a gang, a cartel that has, that is trying to kill you. And they're actually denying people asylum as well. So there's people literally coming up to Border Patrol, not sneaking in, not anything, saying, I am coming, I have a case for asylum, please take me, I want to go hear a judge, and they're like, no. So there's lawyers down there that are saying that there was another woman with the ACLU, and she was like, well, this woman has a case for asylum, you have to hear her, and she needs to see a judge, and they're like, no. And she's like, well, I'm a lawyer, and they were like, well, we don't care, and they sent them both away. And this particular woman was running from a cartel who her husband was a part of. He had abused her. She had every reason to believe that she was going to be persecuted, which is one of the conditions to get asylum, and they still denied her. They didn't want to hear it. Another issue that was brought to our attention, and I feel like this affects everybody, is the mass surveillance that's happening there. So basically, if you live within 100 miles of a border zone, which includes us, it's the coast, the Canadian border, the southern border, if you live within 100 miles, we can have our constitutional rights violated, essentially, in the name of national security. And 75% of the U.S. population lives in a border zone. So they recently got money for 4,000 new cameras, surveillance cameras. They're actually modeling it after the UK styles of surveillance that was happening, and they're working with Israeli corporations. They're using face recognition software. And so when people come in through the border, like the U.S.-Mexico border, and then there's another checkpoint 100 miles up, or actually I'm not sure how many miles, but there's another checkpoint like an hour and a half up before you can reach like San Antonio and all the other cities. And what they've started doing is pulling people and saying, well, you came into the border 4 hours ago and it's only an hour and a half drive, so what were you doing? Why did it take you so long to get here? I don't really feel like you're allowed to ask people that, but that's something that they're doing, stopping perfectly innocent people and violating their rights like that. And these are multinational corporations who own this data, and we don't know what law they're beholden to. We don't know if it's United States law, if they're working with the United States government, or wherever else their company is based. So this is causing like kind of an issue of surveillance. And we met with some scholars who were telling us that a lot of the times they test these surveillance measures in the border region down south, and then they bring it to other places of the country. So this is things that could be happening in New York City soon, or could be happening in California or wherever. And also, Border Patrol is taking on this role, and we're not sure if they're a civilian force or if they're a military force. They have weapons of military grade, but if you ask them, they're merely government employees. And so that's also creating some kind of, ambiguity in what is really the law, what are you really allowed to do. So it was definitely a very interesting experience. There's so many problems going on there, and the biggest thing that we took away was that everything that you read in the news it's ridiculous compared to what's actually happening there. When you go there and you witness the systemic violence that's being carried out against these people who are just here, and there's often a sense of feeling like you're not worthy to to really come into the country, because we're going to keep you here, and if you try and go past, if you're undocumented, you can't. And even if you have status, if you look too Mexican, or if you're poor, or if whatever, they're going to stop you, harass you, and tell you that, oh, we need to check your car, we need to do this. It's very heartbreaking to see.